He asked only for a meal, but his question and what followed would leave the city's elite in stunned silence. The Grand Legacy ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and laughter from the city's wealthiest philanthropists. Then, silence. At the archway stood a man in a dusty janitor's uniform, his work boots leaving faint prints on polished marble. He wasn't supposed to be there. His voice, tired but steady, cut through the chatter. "Can I play it for food?" At first, they laughed. A janitor asking to touch a piano worth more than his yearly salary. Impossible. But what none of them knew was that his next move would turn their cruelty into silence, their certainty into shame, and reveal a truth so powerful it would leave the entire room changed forever. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now, let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. He had survived exhaustion and heartache, but this gilded ballroom was a new kind of battle. A single father, lost in a work uniform that had seen better days, stood at the edge of a sea of tuxedos and gowns. He asked for a meal, not knowing his simple request was about to shatter their carefully constructed world. The air in the Grand Legacy ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted duck. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the 200 men and women below. They were the city's elite, gathered for the annual Children's Hospital Gala, a collection of CEOs and heirs who moved with the easy confidence of people who had never been told no. Into this polished world stepped a ghost. "Excuse me," a voice said, a low rumble that was immediately out of place. He stood just inside the grand archway. His grey janitor's uniform was faded, a dark stain on one knee. His hair was unkempt, and his face was etched with lines of worry, not wealth. His scuffed work boots left faint, dusty footprints on the gleaming floor, each one an act of defiance. He wasn't just out of place, he was an affront to the evening. A ripple of silence spread from the entrance. Heads turned, eyes accustomed to assessing net worth narrowed with disdain. "How in the world did he get in here?" a woman whispered, clutching her pearl necklace. "Security," someone barked. The voice belonged to Richard Thompson, a man whose tailored Italian suit cost more than the janitor made in a month. Richard was a real estate developer with a handsome, cruel face and an air of entitlement that clung to him more closely than his cologne. To him, compassion was a weakness. The janitor seemed not to hear the hostility. His eyes, a tired but gentle blue, scanned the room, not with desperation, but with a quiet sorrow. He took a slow step forward. "Please," he repeated, his voice a little stronger. "I don't want a handout. I saw the piano. Can I play it for a plate of food?" His request hung in the air, so absurd that for a moment, there was only stunned silence. Then a single harsh laugh broke the tension. It was Richard. He threw his head back and roared with mockery. Others, taking their cue from him, joined in. The ballroom filled with cruel laughter. The man stood his ground, his gaze settled on the magnificent grand piano on a low stage. It was a fazioli, with an ebony finish so deep it seemed to swallow the light. Near the kitchen doors, a young waitress named Emily Carter watched, her heart clenching. She was a college student working 2 jobs, and she recognized the quiet dignity in the man's posture. She started to move toward him, but the hotel manager, Mr. Peterson, grabbed her arm. "Don't you dare, Emily," he hissed. "He's not our problem." "Security!" Richard shouted again, on his feet now. "Get this bum out of here. This is a private event for the Children's Hospital. We paid for exclusivity, not to be accosted by the help." 2 large men in black suits began to move toward the janitor. But the man simply raised a hand, a gesture not of defense, but of quiet command. The guards paused, confused. "Please," he said, his voice directed at Richard. "Just one song. That's all I ask. For a hot meal. My shift ran long, and I haven't eaten." Richard's eyes lit up with a malicious idea. A cruel smile spread across his face. "You know what?" he announced, his voice booming with false magnanimity. Let's let him play. Let's give our guest a chance to entertain us. He savored the moment, the absolute power he felt. Here's the deal, he pointed a manicured finger at the janitor. You play us one song. If you can get through it without sounding like a dying cat, I will personally buy you the most expensive meal on the menu. The crowd buzzed, sensing the theatrical cruelty. But, Richard added, when you fail, and we all know you will crawl back to whatever hole you came from. And we will all witness what happens when you give false hope to those who have earned their misery. The janitor, Alex, felt his pulse quicken, not with fear but with a cold resolve. He moved toward the piano, adopting a slow, weary shuffle. He made his hands tremble as he reached for the polished lid, his rough, calloused fingers looking shockingly out of place against the flawless black lacquer. Be careful with that, Manager Peterson squeaked. That instrument is worth more than your life, old man. Richard settled into a velvet chair at the edge of the stage, ready to enjoy the show. Before you begin, he said, let me make the terms more interesting. If, by some miracle, you play well enough to make someone in this room shed a single tear of emotion, I'll give you $1,000. Cash. The ballroom erupted. It was the perfect insult. Offering $1,000 as an impossible grand prize was a way of saying the man's ultimate achievement was worth less than their pocket change. Alex sat on the plush leather bench. He looked down at the 88 keys as if they were an ancient text he couldn't decipher. He needed them to underestimate him completely. He needed their arrogance at its peak before he began to tear it down. Clearly has no formal education, Richard declared loudly. No musical training. We can't expect much from a man who has clearly wasted every opportunity life gave him. Alex slowly lifted his head, his blue eyes finding Richard's. Opportunities, he murmured. Yes, opportunities, Richard sneered. The chances we're all given to make something of ourselves. Everyone in this room took theirs. That's why we're here and you're there, cleaning our floors. And what did I do with what I was given? Alex asked, his voice still gentle. Clearly nothing, Richard exploded. Look at yourself. You are a complete and utter failure. The words hung in the air. Alex looked down at his hands, then placed them over the keys. A hush fell over the room. 200 people waited for the dissonant, clumsy notes that would prove some people were simply worth less than others. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, the vacant, weary look was gone. In its place was a focus so intense it made people in the front row shift uncomfortably. What song is it? Richard demanded, his voice now tinged with an inexplicable nervousness. Alex took a slow, deep breath. A song about a promise, he said. He pressed his right finger down on a single key. Middle C. The note that emerged was not the clumsy sound they expected. It was perfect. Pure, resonant, and impossibly clear, it hung in the silent air like a drop of liquid silver. It was a note played by a hand that knew the soul of a piano. When he lifted his finger, the silence that followed was different. It was no longer the silence of cruel anticipation. It was the silence of stunned surprise. Beginner's luck, Richard muttered, but a frown creased his forehead. Alex's hands moved again, weaving a simple, haunting melody. It was something they didn't recognize, infused with a profound sense of loss and longing. The music spoke of sleepless nights and quiet fears, of a love so fierce it hurt. His left hand joined in, adding deep, resonant chords that gave the music a foundation of sorrow. His fingers, which had looked so rough moments before, now danced over the ivory and ebony with a familiarity that came only from a lifetime of practice. He was holding back, giving them just enough to shatter their expectations. He must have heard it somewhere, Richard said, trying to shrink the man and his talent back down to a manageable size. But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. This wasn't mimicry. This was artistry. The haunting melody filled the ballroom. Waiters froze. The whispers stopped. The music was a magnet, pulling all attention toward the shabby man at the piano. He's actually very good, a woman admitted, her voice filled with reluctant awe. Then, The music became more complex. For a brief moment, Alex allowed a flicker of his true virtuosity to show. His fingers became a blur, flying across the keys in a cascade of brilliant, perfect notes. For 10 seconds, he played like a world-class concert pianist, a torrent of musical genius that was as shocking as it was beautiful. "My God," a man in the front row breathed. Richard shot up from his chair, his face a mask of disbelief. "Impossible," he choked out. And just as quickly, the brilliant flash was gone. Alex returned to the simpler, sadder melody, finishing with a few soft chords that faded into a profound, ringing silence. No one moved. They had expected a farce and had witnessed something inexplicably beautiful. Emily, the waitress, was openly weeping, tears streaming down her face. An old gentleman with kind eyes, Abram Stevens, slowly rose from his table. He had built a manufacturing empire from nothing and had been a patron of the arts for 50 years. He knew a master's touch. He stopped a few feet from the piano, his eyes filled not with pity, but with respect. There were tears glistening in his own eyes. "Young man," he said, his voice gentle. "Where on earth did you learn to play like that?" Alex looked up at him, dropping the weary act. "Here and there, sir," he replied. "My mother taught me the basics. Life taught me the rest." Richard could not stand it. "Stevens, don't be a fool," he snapped, marching toward the stage. "He's a janitor. People like him don't play the piano." "And why not, Richard?" Mr. Stevens turned to face him, his calm a stark contrast to Richard's rage. "What law of nature says a man who works for a living cannot also possess a great gift? Education." Richard spat. "Opportunity, money. You need those things." "Access to what, exactly?" Alex asked softly, his voice cutting through Richard's tirade. "To conservatories? With all due respect, sir, you don't just learn music in expensive schools. You learn it by living. You learn it by hurting. You learn it when the melody in your head is the only thing keeping you from going insane. You learn it when you have nothing else left." His words resonated through the ballroom. "Play again," Mr. Stevens requested. Alex turned back to the piano. The mask was slipping. He chose a piece by Chopin, the Revolutionary Etude. It was a declaration of war. The first thunderous chord crashed through the ballroom. The music was a tempest, a furious, swirling storm of notes that spoke of struggle and rebellion. It was impossibly fast, impossibly complex, and he played it with a fire that was terrifying and beautiful. Richard watched, his face draining of color. The old, worthless man was demonstrating a power, a genius that Richard knew he could never possess. "Stop it!" Richard yelled, but his voice was swallowed by the magnificent fury of the music. The performance had ceased to be a plea for food. It had become a judgment. The final thunderous chords of Chopin's Etude crashed down, leaving a stunned and shattered silence. Richard was pale. The janitor, the failure, had just channeled the soul of a revolution through his fingertips. Richard saw the looks on the faces around him, awe, shame, confusion, and realized with a sickening lurch that he had lost the room. Mr. Stevens stood near the stage, his old eyes fixed on Alex. What he had just heard was a perfect marriage of technical flawlessness and profound, world-weary soul. A memory flickered in his mind, a story he'd heard years ago about a young prodigy who vanished from the concert world. It couldn't be. Alex let the silence stretch. Now, it was time for the final lesson. Slowly, he raised his hands back to the keyboard. The notes that emerged were as soft and gentle as falling snow. He began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune. If the Chopin had been a storm, this was the quiet silver light that followed. The melody was achingly beautiful, a song of memory, of moonlight on still water, of a peace that could only be found after a long and brutal war. He played with a tenderness that was almost unbearable. He closed his eyes, lost in a world that only he and the music inhabited. This was the peace that broke them. The woman who had laughed about his grimy hands covered her mouth, a sob caught in her throat. All across the room, hard, cynical facades began to crumble. Tears welled in eyes that hadn't cried in years. Mr. Stevens felt a single warm tear trace a path down his wrinkled cheek. The old story came rushing back with undeniable force. He watched Richard's face, who saw the tear and knew the bet was lost. The impossible condition had been met. Alex brought the piece to a close, the final notes fading into absolute silence. It was a silence filled with respect, with awe, and with a heavy dose of collective shame. He slowly pushed the bench back and stood up. As he rose, his posture changed. The weary slump was gone. He stood tall, his shoulders squared. He turned to face the room, his eyes clear and sharp, locking onto Richard Thompson. "You owe me $1,000, he said. His voice was no longer a pleading murmur. It was a clear, steady baritone filled with authority. Richard, flustered, fumbled for his wallet. He pulled out a thick wad of bills and strode to the stage, wanting to throw the money to re-establish his dominance. "Here," he spat, thrusting the money toward Alex. "Take your charity and get out." Alex didn't move. "I don't believe I mentioned charity," he said, his voice cold. "This was a wager. One that you proposed, and one that you lost." Humiliated, Richard dropped the money onto the piano's gleaming surface. Alex ignored the cash. He stepped forward. "That first song, the simple one," he began. "I wrote it for my daughter. It's her lullaby. She's sick. She's in the very hospital you are all supposedly raising money for tonight." A wave of sober realization passed through the crowd. This wasn't just music. This was testimony. "And the Chopin," he continued, his eyes finding Richard again. "It's about fighting back. It is the sound of a man who has lost nearly everything but his honor and who will not surrender. And the Debussy, that's for her. For the quiet moments when I remember what I'm fighting for." He walked from the stage, and the crowd parted for him as if he were royalty. He stopped directly in front of Richard. "You spoke of opportunity," Alex said. "You said I had wasted mine. Let me tell you about the opportunities one was given. 10 years ago, I was offered a recording contract and a world tour. But my daughter, Lily, was diagnosed with a rare genetic disorder. She needed years of treatments, constant care. So I was given a choice. A life of fame or a life with her. I chose her. I took this job, any job, to be near her, to pay for her medicine." He paused, his voice hardening. "I've had the opportunity to work 18-hour shifts. The opportunity to hold my daughter's hand through painful procedures. The opportunity to choose sacrifice over selfishness every single day. Tell me, Mr. Thompson, what great sacrifices have you made?" Mr. Stevens, who had been listening with rapt attention, finally stepped forward. His face was ashen. "My God," he whispered. He looked at Alex, but spoke to the entire room. "I knew I recognized that style. 10 years ago, at the National Juilliard competition. There was a young man, a prodigy they said was the next Horowitz. He won, and then, he vanished. His name was Alexander Petrov." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. They were not looking at a janitor. They were in the presence of a lost legend. Richard Thompson stood frozen, his world utterly shattered. He had called a genius a failure. The sheer, catastrophic scale of his misjudgment was so immense it felt as if the floor was about to open and swallow him whole. "You, Mr. Thompson," Alex said, his voice now devoid of all emotion. "You stand here tonight as the chairman of a gala for sick children, and you showed nothing but contempt for a father fighting for his. How can a man with so much poison in his heart be trusted to care for those who are suffering?" He didn't need an answer. The verdict was on every face. Richard Thompson was finished. Mr. Stevens stepped forward. "Richard, as the primary patron of this hospital and this event, I find your behavior tonight to be a disgrace to everything we stand for. Consider your position on the hospital board terminated. I believe your presence is no longer required." Defeated, Richard turned and stumbled toward the exit, a broken man disappearing into the darkness he had so richly earned. Alex's eye scanned the crowd until he found Emily, still standing by the kitchen. He beckoned to her. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice now warm. "Emily, sir." "Emily," Alex said with a genuine smile. "Tonight, I saw a great deal of ugliness. But I also saw you. I saw your kindness. You were willing to risk your job for a stranger." He turned back to Mr. Stevens. "This is the kind of person who embodies the spirit of this hospital." Mr. Stevens nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. He looked from Emily's compassionate face to Alex's powerful one. Finally, Alex walked back to the piano. He gathered the scattered bills Richard had thrown there. He walked to the stunned Emily and pressed the wad of cash into her hand. "I believe this is yours," he said softly. "The prize for winning a bet." Mr. Thompson wagered no one could be moved to tears. "You and Mr. Stevens proved him wrong. You proved humanity could still be found here." He then turned to address the ballroom one last time. "Look around you," he commanded. "Tonight you saw a man in a janitor's uniform and you judged him. You saw a man in a fine suit and you followed him. You were wrong on both counts. Remember that true worth is measured by character, and it is often found in the most unexpected places." With that, he turned and walked toward the archway. Mr. Stevens hurried after him. "Mr. Petrov." "Alexander." "Wait. Your daughter, Lily. I want to cover all of her medical expenses. All of them. And when she is well, the world needs to hear your music again. I will sponsor your return to the stage." For the first time that night, tears welled in Alexander Petrov's eyes. He had come asking for a meal. He was leaving with a miracle. He had entered as a ghost they tried to erase. He left as a legend they could never forget. The music, in the end, had done more than fill a room with sound. It had filled it with truth. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive stories.